Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order, and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Ben.
And I'm Sarah.
Thank you for listening to us today. How are you doing today, Sarah?
I'm doing all right. Just got a haircut.
Yeah. Freshened up.
Yeah. Welcome to March, the third month of the year. How you doing? 3 months into 2025.
Yeah. How did January last 5 years and then February was like 2 days?
Yeah. That's a good question.
I don't know. I'm mostly just hoping that it gets warmer.
I don't know if this is a universal saying, but a saying here in Alberta is that March will be in like a lamb, out like a lion, or the reverse. So basically, if it begins with just a horrendous snowstorm, by the end, it'll be out like a lamb. It'll be warm and fine. We have yet to see whether it will be lamb or lion that we deal with.
Yeah, the only constant is that February is cold.
Yes.
So...
Speaking of cold.
Yet in no way. Other than the Cold War, perhaps.
What are we watching today?
Today, Sarah, we are watching The Beast of Yucca Flats from 1961, written and directed by Coleman Francis.
Is Mr. Francis cold?
No.
Is he a cold man?
No.
Cold man? Okay.
No. So Coleman Francis was born in Oklahoma in 1919, and he spent the Great Depression moving west through Texas to California, where he wanted to start an acting career. And he served in World War II and played uncredited bit parts through the 40s and 50s. He did not get his first screen credit until 1958. And then in 1959, he met Anthony Cardoza, who was a welder at a jet engine factory. Now, Cardoza had fought with distinction in the Korean War, and he must have been making good money as a welder. He was also married to race car driver Joy Wilkerson. They had one daughter.
That sounds like such an interesting couple.
Right? Francis, meanwhile, had a wife, Beverly, and 2 sons. And somehow, Francis convinced Cardoza to go in with him on producing a movie. Cardoza already had some experience with this. He had worked as a producer on Ed Wood's Final Curtain and Night of the Ghouls.
Both famously smooth productions.
Yeah, that definitely finished and came out.
Yes. They did come out eventually, is the thing.
Sure. Coleman Francis, basically this married professional extra with 2 sons, and Anthony
not 3 sons.
No.
You can't say my 3 sons.
No. Anthony Cardoza, this jet engine welder with a race car driver wife and a daughter, decide to get together and make a movie.
Why are you highlighting that they have children?
I don't know, just the fact that I want to highlight that they were just
family men?
Regular Joes, I guess, in a way. Cardoza put up $34,000 of his own money in 1959 to produce The Beast of Yucca Flats.
How much is that in today's money?
Would be probably about, $350,000 maybe?
Wow. I don't have a spare 30,000 anyways.
No. I don't think he had it spare. The vibe I got was that Cardoza was just sort of paying for things as they came, as they needed to be paid for. But they got together to produce this movie. Coleman Francis wrote and directed it. Cardoza put up the money and handled all of the producing duties, all of the making it happen parts of this. He employed some Ed Wood regulars like Conrad Brooks and most notably Tor Johnson. And Beast of Yucca Flats would be the final film role for Tor. And he plays a Soviet scientist who defects to the U.S. and then gets irradiated into a monster.
Into a beast.
Right. From Yucca Flats, which is a real place that you could get very irradiated in. Right?
Yes. Could get irradiated in, I can't confirm nor deny.
Okay.
It's all very hush-hush, as it were.
Okay.
So Yucca Flats is...
is it hush-hush that nuclear bombs cause radiation?
No, it's more, this place is definitely safe to, like, kind of come by, and definitely can do a tour here next time you're visiting Las Vegas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me more about it.
So it is an area of the Nevada nuclear test sites. If you aren't familiar with the Nevada test sites, that's where the United States government did all of the domestic testing of nukes.
Yeah.
This is an area in the Nevada desert that was purchased in 1951, and for the next 43 years had over 900 tests performed here. Nearly 4 of every 5 of those tests were in the area called Yucca Flats.
Huh.
If you look at the number...
Was it flat before all of the nuclear bombs were dropped on it?
It sure is flat now.
Okay, yeah.
Of the numbers of the nuclear test sites, they go up to like 50. Numbers 1 through 10, except for 5, are considered part of Yucca Flats.
Okay. Sorry, the areas go up to 50?
Yeah, 51's next door.
Oh, I see.
Literally, they share a border. So you might be asking yourself, why Yucca Flats? Like, why this area out of the entire rest of these test sites? And it's because it's flat.
Okay.
There are some, I don't know, calling them mountains is a little much, but very high hills kind of around this flat area, which are perfect for observation. To the south of this area is Yucca Lake, which is a dry lake. And so they have a runway that goes down there. So it's much easier to kind of like get materials into in terms of the scope of the size of the Nevada test sites. So they chose Yucca Flats because of like convenience. There were tests done outside of Yucca Flats, but those tended to be tests that needed some kind of special thing. Maybe they were being tested at like 20 feet underground. Maybe there needed to be some other kind of element there. But if they were just doing like run-of-the-mill standard, we're not trying to do any weird tests, they're going to use Yucca Flats. And I think that's why they used it so often.
If you need to know what a nuclear bomb will do if you detonate it on a slope, you don't go to Yucca Flats. But when you want to know what it'll do on sort of a even plane, you'll go to Yucca Flats.
Yeah, well, like if you think about the way that scientists do experiments, they try to have as much controlled variables as possible.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that, this very flat place, that's where we're going to go to do most of this testing.
For sure.
Now, on the podcast, we have previously covered nuclear tests and their devastating effects when it's come to the Pacific tests. I think we covered it in most detail with our Gojira episode. With the Nevada test sites and Yucca Flats, these tests were of a lesser amount and force, typically at or under 1 metric ton.
Okay.
So if the government wanted to test something in terms of like devastating force, they went to the Marshall Islands. If they wanted to test in terms of like, can we, what happens to like a brick building versus a wood building when it gets hit by nuclear force? They would go to Yucca Flats. If they wanted to test using nukes in ballistic guns, they would go to Yucca Flats. For example, Operation Upshot Knot Hole is when they tested, can we put nukes into big ass gun tanks?
Okay.
I don't know the official term for them.
Artillery?
Artillery, that's the word. And that's the specific operation that was going on whose fallout impacted the filming of the 1956 movie The Conqueror with John Wayne.
Right. The really bad movie where John Wayne, of all people, plays Genghis Khan.
And everyone caught cancer because of the being downwind of these test sites.
Yeah. Because this is the problem when your nuclear test locations are secret.
They're not really secret, though. Everyone knew that this is the Nevada test site where they test nukes.
I mean,
and they know that this is it because you can see the mushroom clouds in Vegas.
Yeah.
And they happened at a regular rate through the 50s that it was a tourist attraction.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's only so secret that you can keep an atomic explosion.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure they wouldn't have shot the Conqueror if they had known about the prevailing winds. I don't know, man. It's such a mess.
It is a mess. I could go into more detail if you'd like about the Conqueror in the case of that being downwind.
Uh-huh.
So about half of the production got sick in like the years afterwards with like cancer related things. Mm-hmm. John Wayne died of cancer as an example. But this is including like gaffers, you know, just like people who were not in front of the camera. And who didn't have star power in that sort of way. So when it came out that like, we were downwind and an operation was happening right then and there and directly downwind, it wasn't like, it happened to be in a weird breeze that day. Mm-hmm. By the time that the production crew, I'll say in a very general way, took a lawsuit against the government about getting damages for all of this, there was already a lot of discussion about other folks who had been downwind of these nuclear sites.
Sure.
They're called downwinders.
Okay.
As like a easily identifiable group, I guess. So they had precedent to kind of go on. The problem is, and what was ultimately ruled, is that everyone was fucking smoking.
Right.
So you can't say definitively my cancer was called from being downwind.
Sure. Yeah. It's like, well, I died of cancer. Well, was it because of the nuclear explosion or the 6 packs of cigarettes that you had a day?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like John Wayne died of lung cancer. He smoked a pack a day.
Yeah.
Like there's no way to definitively prove. The courts did say like, yeah, the government fucked up and they were negligent and that's a problem, but they don't owe you damages because you can't prove.
Right.
Which fucking sucks because you kind of can prove.
Sure.
So speaking of fallout, the tests, the fallout from these Nevada tests, you can kind of see it's pretty much all of the states that are eastward from Nevada. They specifically go to Utah, but you can see the impacts, especially now that we are like 60 plus years past the test site being active with explosions. You can see them across the central states from Idaho east to the Dakotas, down along Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, and even in 2 parts of Texas.
You're talking about like how far
the fallout could have spread due to the winds.
Gotcha.
Now notice that I said explosive tests.
Okay.
So on July 25th, 1963, so after this movie, the US and USSR agreed to ban atmospheric nuclear testing under the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Now, atmospheric testing means like detonating the bomb in the air.
Okay.
They also did like no testing in water, that sort of thing. That's great, but it means that a lot of the tests that were going on at the Nevada test sites moved underground.
Oh, sure.
Which has had devastating environmental impacts.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah.
Not that like
soil and whatnot.
Exactly. So it's Yucca Flats and like the Nevada test site at large, but specifically Yucca Flats. It's considered one of the most irradiated, actually not even one of the most irradiated places on the planet.
Sure. Yeah, 4 out of 5 of all nuclear bomb tests or whatever happened there.
Yeah.
Like that's, yeah, for sure.
Now, these explosive tests did stop in 1992. There was a 9-month moratorium on test explosions. That 9-month moratorium ended in July 1993 when President Clinton decided to extend that moratorium, but never ratified it. So theoretically, there's no legislation prohibiting explosive tests from starting again.
Right.
Isn't that fun?
I mean...
Isn't that fun to know, Ben?
On the other hand, while that means that they could start again at any time, the fact that there's nothing in place saying you can't, but everyone just kind of stopped and stayed stopped is something.
Now, I specify explosive testing because there is like testing going on still, but a lot of those R&D tests are about like life cycle of where things are being stored and like more like will this plant be able to handle living in an area that is as irradiated as Yucca Flats?
Sure.
So no one's like actively bombing Yucca Flats anymore. And as I said at the top, you can actually go visit it if you would like. A fun fact is that in 1962, they did a test that was for non-military means. It was to see if they could use nukes to create a large enough space to create a man-made lake.
Oh, sure.
And if they could use that as a lake or if it would be
radioactive.
Full of radiation. They succeeded in making a big hole.
Yeah.
And you can go visit that big hole.
Yep.
In the middle of the desert. Isn't that fun?
Listen, as long as they don't start being like, well, we're doing experiments to see if ChatGPT can be tested with the nuclear codes. As long as that sort of shit doesn't start happening, I think we're okay. So, monster created by radiation, pretty standard late 50s sci-fi horror premise, right?
Yeah. And like I said, the fact that there were nuclear tests going on in the Nevada desert, not a secret.
Yeah. So the Beast of Yucca Flats was shot on weekends over the course of 1959. That's why I was like, I don't think Cardoza so much like, slapped down a check for $34,000 as much as like, I think he just paid for things as they happened. But yeah, they shot it on weekends. And then it was edited sort of in the same fashion, like When We Have Time, over the course of 1960. The production didn't have the ability to record a soundtrack during filming, so all the dialogue was dubbed in post. And to make that as like painless as possible, it was decided to like have as little dialogue as possible and to see if you could edit the movie so that like most of the time when this guy's talking, we're looking at the face of the person he's talking to.
Classic.
Also, with there not being a lot of dialogue, extensive narration by Coleman Francis himself was put in to explain the plot.
That's fair,
Now, by the time the finished film was starting to take shape, we're getting into 1960, late 1960. It's becoming clear that the story of a radioactive monster had kind of quickly fallen behind the times in the B-movie horror scene. Like, 1961, this feels like an Ed Wood premise from 1958, right? And
yes,
it's
because it is.
Right. But it's like, it is weird how by like 1961, it's like, oh, wow, like a radioactive monster, like how passe. And so a new prologue was shot by Coleman Francis. Very like kind of, it's just like him and a camera and like two actors kind of thing in an apartment. But it basically features a nude woman coming out of a shower and being strangled to death by presumably the Beast of Yucca Flats. Not portrayed by Tor Johnson, but kind of portrayed by a body double. Because you just see his like arms. It might have been Coleman Francis himself. I'm not sure. This new opening was then bolted on to the start of the film before the credits. And it's kind of like got the feeling of like a cold open and then like, oh, we're going to go back in time to show you how we got to this point. Except there's no point in the story that scene could possibly take place.
Classic. I mean, it's even a 1950s thing, trope of show the monster too soon and like show the danger, run credits, and then have 50 minutes of nothing.
Yeah.
And then 10 minutes of something.
Yeah.
There's your
sure.
movie.
It's
We're really not selling this movie.
Yeah. So Cardoza tried to get the film picked up by a distributor. He took it to 20th Century Fox, and they said no. And he took it to AIP, and they said no.
Oh, no.
And ultimately, what they did to release the film was that Cardoza rented theaters himself, and then they played it in those theaters, which is a very expensive way of doing things. They found that the film played well in cities like San Diego, which had large off-duty sailor populations, thanks to the numerous sexy women in the movie.
Yeah, that's why they put them in the movie.
Mm-hmm. So The Beast of Yucca Flats is universally panned by critics. It is considered one of the worst films ever made, with a lot of like particular ire directed at its narration. Most reviews mention how arduous the narration is.
Oh, no.
But it did do well enough for Coleman Francis and Anthony Cardoza to make two more pictures together. The Skydivers in 1963 and Red Zone Cuba in 1966. Neither of those are horror movies, so we won't be looking at them. In 1963, Cardoza quit his welding job and went into producing full time. And after splitting from Francis, he produced a highly successful woman's biker gang movie in 1968 called The Hellcats that grossed $12 million.
Good for him.
He died of a stroke in 2015. Francis, meanwhile, after he split up from Cardoza, kind of dropped out of sight. I should back up and say that by the time the filming of Beast of Yucca Flats was over, he had divorced his wife, or his wife had divorced him, might be more accurate. She appears in the movie as one of the characters, but they were basically no longer married by the time it came out. And yeah, by the late 60s, like Cardoza had moved on to doing successful movies. And so Coleman Francis kind of dropped out of sight until 1973, when he was found dead in the back of a station wagon with a plastic bag over his head and a tube going into his mouth and around his throat.
Oh.
The official cause of death was arteriosclerosis. The rest remains completely unexplained.
What does that mean?
Arteriosclerosis? It means like the buildup of hardening tissue in your arteries. Like,
so nothing to do with like asphyxiation and the tube wasn't connected to like the exhaust pipe?
No, he just had a a plastic bag over his head and a tube going into his mouth and around his throat. And then, the coroner was like, he died of like clogged arteries, essentially.
What year?
1973.
Would they have been, so you know how like when someone in Hollywood dies due to strangulation with their pants down?
Yeah, autoerotic asphyxiation.
Yeah, would they have said that specific thing here? Like, is there a chance that that's what it was, and then they're just like covering it up with no, it was the arteries?
Nobody knows.
Someone knows.
I mean, either Coleman Francis, who's dead, or the other thing is like, did somebody kill him?
Yeah.
Like, it's super bizarre.
Yeah.
And
I do feel like if I was trying to kill someone, a plastic bag plus a tube around the neck, that's just going for extra credit.
Anthony Cardoza got like asked about it, and he was like, I haven't talked to Coleman in years. That's super weird. I don't know anything about this.
Wow. Okay. Great. How are we watching this movie, Ben?
Well, I should say, Tor Johnson passed away from heart failure in 1971 at age 67, just to kind of wrap up
his story?
His story, because we're not going to be seeing Tor again. This is the last time we're seeing him in a film.
Did he retire after this movie?
Basically, yeah. Like, he was in his...
He's like, I'm too old for this.
Well, he was like a wrestler, right? And like, he was in his 60s by now. He did get his face cast for like what was for 10 years like the most popular Halloween mask, like rubber Halloween mask that was sold in the 60s. So that's something.
Maybe he was living off the royalties.
Yeah. Now, it's likely that no one today would even know much about Coleman Francis and Anthony Cardoza, if not for the fact that their films, which have lapsed into the public domain, obviously, have been featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000. So Beast of Yucca Flats is episode 21 of season 6. The Skydivers is episode 9 of season 6. Red Zone Cuba is episode 19 of season 6. And Hellcats is episode 9 of season 2. So every single one of Anthony Cardoza's films has been on Mystery Science Theater 3000.
I mean, Hellcats must have been sort of good. It made $12 million.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lesbian biker gang movie. What else do you want?
Yeah, okay. Now I see why it got its money.
So being in the public domain, The Beast of Yucca Flats has been released multiple times on home video by companies like Image Entertainment, Alpha Video, Mill Creek, and Echo Bridge. It is on our YouTube playlist, and you can also watch it on Tubi.
Okay. Well, folks, if you would like to watch along, head over to Tubi or to our YouTube playlist, which you can find at screamscenepodcast.com. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss The Beast of Yucca Flats from 1961, directed by Coleman Francis.
See you on the other side, everybody.
Welcome back to Scream Scene. We just finished watching The Beast of Yucca Flats from 1961, directed by Coleman Francis. This movie is unfortunately very bad. Ben, what did you think?
The Beast of Yucca Flats. Coleman Francis. Noted director. Crushed under the wheels of progress.
Yeah, the narration's very, like, wanting to be Twilight Zone?
Yeah, it's going for this, like, hard-boiled, like, serious, dragnet, kind of semi-deep sort of thing. And it's trying to do, like, a lot of repetition in a way that is supposed to be, like, rhythmic or poetic almost, but it's really just
tiring.
Yeah.
It does mean that I knew the people's names pretty well.
Sure.
So let me tell you, listener, what it's about. So we do have that opening scene that Ben teased. It's not good, and I honestly found it quite, like, disturbing in a way that I don't think, like, was befitting of this movie.
Yeah, it's weird for, like, 3 reasons. The first is that it really just comes out of nowhere. Like, there's no, such and such films presents. We just, like, start on a shot of a naked girl and then, like...
Do you want me to tell people what happens so that way there's some context for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yes, it opens with a girl. She's just come out of the shower, and she stares in the mirror for a very long time as she's drying herself. So we get a lot of time to just, like, look at her looking at herself. And then she walks to her bed and sits down on her bed with the towel on and continues drying herself. And then suddenly she looks up, and out of frame, 2 hands come and choke her. Now, she's not acting very well. She's kind of like, you can tell, like, there's a grimace, but she doesn't, like, there's no scream, there's nothing. He strangles her, lays her down on the bed, makes sure she's all on the bed, and then gets on the bed And we kind of like hold on her face as the bed moves a bit. And then we cut to like the actual opening. And it's so fucked. Like, because the film is implying like either girl's dead and now he's fucking her corpse.
Yeah.
Or she's knocked out and he's raping her.
Sure. And it's like, okay, so like this scene is so bizarre because it is the first scene in the movie.
Yes.
And just comes in with like no prep. It is bizarre because it has nothing to do with the rest of the movie, which I had already mentioned in the intro. And it is bizarre because like it's a scene that like maybe could work in like a different horror movie if it was like deep into the narrative and like you had an established set of characters and stuff to like know what's happening, what's going on. But it really has nothing to do with the rest of the movie. And so it's just this like isolated bit of like
shocking for the sake of being shocking.
Right.
And it's not done in any kind of stylistic way. So it feels like very
exploitative,
very blatant in its exploitation. And
entirely gratuitous.
And it feels like an intrusive thought from the director.
Sure, yeah. Like it's transgressive and it's jarring, but the fact that it is so blatantly not part of the rest of the movie is what makes it gratuitous, and that makes it feel gross.
Yeah.
Anyways.
So luckily the rest of the movie is just blah. So you don't need to worry about that fucked up shit happening again. So let's go into the rest of the movie. We follow Soviet scientist Joseph Javorsky. He arrives at Yucca Flats with Soviet secrets, and 2 KGB agents are here to try to stop him from defecting, but just shooting him.
It's the sloppiest KGB operation I've ever seen. Just, hey, let's drive after, like, I guess the U.S. military car sent to pick him up and just shoot revolvers at them.
Yes, Putin is very ashamed of this particular mission. So to escape, Javorsky runs into the desert just as an atomic bomb goes off, and that mutates him into a mindless killing machine. The narration helpfully explains that he just has the urge to kill, and that's all that drives him. We do see he has some like scarring on his face here and there, just like overall fairly basic.
Yeah, just like burn scars on his face, and his clothing is ripped up and stuff.
We see that he approaches these 2 newlyweds who are driving along, and they stop to check the engine or something. He kills the guy, and then takes the girl, and the murdered man on the side of the road gets the attention of the local police named Jim and Joe. So they try to track down the mysterious killer, only to find the woman maybe still breathing, having been like kidnapped basically and put into a cave. And as they are taking her down the mountain, she dies. So in order to try to catch this mysterious killer, Jim decides to go up in a plane, and he'll like shoot down like a terrible poacher that you see shooting down grizzlies or something. Meanwhile, a vacationing family is driving along. Their car breaks down on the side of the road, and the 2 young boys decide to go exploring, and then they get lost. So the dad goes to try to find them. Jim mistakes the dad as the killer because he was told, shoot first, ask questions later. So he sees a dad running around, tries to shoot at him. Now, the dad kind of assumes that this is because he's like maybe on government property, because he passes a sign that says that he's in missile range. So I feel like the dad kind of hand waves it away. He ends up maybe getting shot, but then running out to try to get help and brings people back and is like not worried at all about the fact that he was shot at. I don't know. Anyways, the dad manages to get away, and then he goes to try to find help to find the kids before they get shot.
That's right. The biggest danger to these children is not the Beast of Yucca Flats, but the police. Coleman Francis says a cab.
Jesus. So Joseph, the Beast, he comes across the boys and chases them.
Joseph Jaworski.
Yeah, Joseph Jaworski.
Noted scientist. Who now has a branch that he kind of uses as a cane because poor Tor Johnson can only go so fast up these hills. And so he does shake his cane at these boys as if to say, get off my lawn. Get off my Yucca Flats. So he chases the boys. Eventually, Joe and Jim find Joseph Jaworski, shoot him, and end up protecting the kids by killing Joseph. The end. Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
The kids make it back to their mother. A bunny rabbit nuzzles with dead Joseph Jaworski, noted scientist.
Because of humanity.
Right, humanity, yes. And man's inhumanity to man.
Yes, the narration has a lot of prose about how man is so inhumane to his own kind, that progress is the opposite of innocence, that progress is therefore destruction, it's relentless, you'll just be crushed under the unrelenting wheel of it.
It has, I don't mean this in a good way, it has kind of this Homeric quality where every character, when the narration talks about them, the narration will basically repeat their full name as well as like a brief description of who and what they are, so that I guess you, the audience, can remember.
Yes.
Because like there is, as we mentioned in the intro, almost no dialogue. So none of these characters like have characterization, right? They're just kind of
beings.
Right. But like it's very similar to the way that like in the Odyssey or the Iliad or like other old oral traditions, you would have like these mnemonic devices to like remember who people were. So like, yeah, Joseph Jaworski, noted scientist, Jim Archer, paratrooper in Korea. Like,
yeah, like I will say, so it's clear by the credits as well that Coleman Francis was like the editor of this. So everything that we see on screen is his choice.
Right, absolutely.
Including the music. And I think the music had some good choices. Mm-hmm. Nothing felt repetitive. Nothing felt out of place.
It's doing its best to try to add like the tension and mood setting to the movie that the filmmaking can't manage on its own. Yeah.
There's no drastic like needle drops or needle lifts. So, credit where credit's due. But otherwise, this movie is not good. It's fairly boring, but at least it's only an hour. It has no sense of pacing. No sense of continuity time or continuous time, like anything like that. But, at least it does understand that A goes to B, goes to C. It does understand story.
Right.
In that way.
Yes.
Which I just really try to get that it's not necessarily...
It's like, not dysfunctional.
Yeah, it's bad storytelling, but it's not incompetent.
The thing is that this is just such an obviously amateur effort that it's kind of hard to get like too upset with it. Like this is so very clearly like a guy and some people he was able to round up, and somehow Tor Johnson like going out to Bronson Canyon on weekends and shooting some stuff in the park, and editing it together later and figuring out, okay, we need to put some narration on this. Like it's, and I can empathize with that. I've made movies like this. Not like exactly like this, but in a similar
in that style of, okay, between weekends, we can maybe get some gear and, hey, who's available to come play a dead body in the basement of this building downtown?
Right, exactly. That was Sarah 15 years ago. But like, yeah, so it's hard to like complain too much, right? And to throw too much at this. It's all shot on location. Mm-hmm. There's no sets. It's all shot during the daytime, but there is parts that feel like maybe they're supposed to be day for night because they're a little darker. So very little happens. Like,
yeah.
To give you an idea, like after that first initial scene, like the shootout with the KGB guys that lead to the atomic blast is maybe, I want to guess, like the first 15 minutes of the movie. And then like him attacking the married couple on the road and schlepping the girl up to his cave and the cops finding the girl, like that section's maybe like another 15 minutes. And then by then you're like half hour into the movie or so, maybe 40 minutes into the movie. So the last like half of the movie solidly is just the kids wandering around lost, their dad wandering around looking for them, the cops wandering around looking for the killer, and the killer wandering around looking for people to kill.
Oh, and the mom sat on the side of the road.
Yes. And they're all just kind of occasionally crossing paths. The thing is that to come back to that opening scene, it is so inappropriate for this movie, but on a certain level, it's without it. It's so inappropriate for this movie because without it, this movie is so bloodless that it could be like a kid's Saturday morning kind of show.
Mm-hmm,
like,
especially with the kids being in danger.
Right. Because like the way that he chokes the man and woman to death is very like,
I have placed my hands around your neck.
And now you've turned off.
Yes.
Like,
and it's not like implied atomic power, like he's supposed to be strangling them.
Yeah. And so it's very like soft in terms of its violence. And poor Tor Johnson is just not up to the task of being threatening, having to like get up and down all these hills because yes, in this movie, Yucca Flats is extremely topographically diverse. There's cliffs that drop 1,000 feet and huge plateaus that you have to like get a plane to get up on top of. And there's all kinds of hills and giant rocks and things we're running up and down because this is actually like Bronson Canyon, right? And Tor Johnson's just so slow and it takes him so long to like stand up or lie down. And
it doesn't help that the ADR of him like yelling or growling or roaring,
yeah,
it really just sounds like him going, ah, oh,
Yeah, exactly. So like he doesn't come across honestly as particularly threatening, especially because like two children are able to outrun him supremely, very easily, and all he can really do to them is like shake a stick at them. And once he kills that first like married couple, he doesn't do anything else really for the rest of the movie. And in terms of like the cops taking him out, like he doesn't have any kind of radioactive powers or anything. Like he just gets shot a bunch of times. Like ultimately the Beast of Yucca Flats is
humanity.
Well, I was going to say, like, he's just like this poor scientist who got caught in an atomic blast, is covered with burns, and then, like, is wandering around the desert, like, shaking people, being like, ah, and, like, this, I don't know, the guy needed help, you know, not to be shot, like, 16 times by police, desert police, by the way, like, desert patrolmen. I don't know, the cops shooting a dad who's just looking for his sons is also really upsetting to me. The fact that like the movie's just like, yeah, this is just what cops do, man. Like they're looking for a killer and the dad was running. So like, what did he expect was going to happen? Like that's basically what the narration says. I just mean that like the opening scene ends up being weirdly the most horror movie part of the movie, because it is the most horrific thing that happens, because all the other scenes in this movie are so mild and so little happens in them. Yeah, mostly this movie's boring and a waste of time.
I am curious about the Mystery Science Theater 3000 version, because like having some jokes riff through like maybe would make it more watchable.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think one of the advantages of the dearth of dialogue is that there is a lot of opportunity to riff with your friends. Like if you want kind of a dumb movie that you can sit on the couch and just make jokes about as it's going, and you're basically not going to talk over any important information or miss anything. This is a great movie for that.
Yeah.
And it's only like 55 minutes long.
And it's free to watch.
Right.
Move on to ranking?
For sure. How close to the bottom of the list were you looking, Sarah?
So here's the thing. That's why I was like hammering on that it's bad, but it's not incompetent.
Yeah.
The things that are at the bottom of the list, like Son of Ingagi, The Snow Creature, there's a level of incompetency to those movies of like, this is barely a functioning movie.
Yeah.
I think The Beast of Yucca Flats is still a functioning movie. So I started trying to find something on the list that felt like where that line of incompetency sticks in.
Sure, yeah.
And I started thinking about Mesa of Lost Women at number 279. So I felt like, okay, that's a good floor. And then looking above that, I don't know why. I do know why. It's because of leech facts. But I really like Attack of the Giant Leeches at 275. I feel like that's a functioning movie.
It's also not just the leech facts, but the fact that you then went to like that museum about leeches and they had the Attack of the Giant Leeches poster there.
Oh, so fact check here. So I went to the Field Museum in Chicago and they had a whole exhibit about blood and like mythical creatures about blood, how we've thought about blood. And they had a big poster of Attack of the Giant Leeches as one of the pop culture examples of talking about blood and talking about blood suckers. And it was just so charming that like this random terrible movie got a big poster in a fucking museum.
And that you knew about it. Like
I knew about it. And like, I was like, the only person in this exhibit at the time, and there was one person who was working there in the exhibit because they, brought like these little like things from the permanent collection to show during part of this. So they had like, a skeleton of a bat or whatever. And so I was like, oh, Attack of the Giant Leeches. And then I realized someone was there and they were like, oh. And I was like, yeah, it's not too bad of a movie. And they're like, you've seen it? And so I started talking to them about the podcast. So shout out to that Field Museum worker. Anyways, so yes, that's why I have a charm around Attack of the Giant Leeches. I will say above that is Night of the Ghouls, which is Ed Wood's movie. Mm-hmm. And I do still feel like Beast of Yucca Flats would go below that.
Yeah, absolutely. On the one hand, like I can kind of see what Coleman Francis was going for with this, right? He just doesn't have enough of this to make it work.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because he doesn't try to do more than he's capable of, right? It's like, hey, we're outside. We're just using like, here's some cars, here's some dudes.
Here's a plane.
Here's a plane. Here's Tor Johnson. Like we're using what we have. And so his reach doesn't really like exceed his grasp, except that for this kind of story to really work, like more stuff needs to be happening in it. And the flip side of this is like the Ed Wood movies where Ed's reach absolutely exceeds his grasp and he's trying to do way too many things and he doesn't have the money to convincingly pull it off, but he's doing it anyway. And so the movies have like stuff that happens in them, right?
And there's also that level of like respect of the gumption.
Yeah, for sure. So what's funny, Sarah, if you're saying that your range is what, 276 to
275 to 279.
Got it. Okay. My range is below yours. It is exactly below yours. Because I also saw Mesa of Lost Women as like a line in the sand. And I went, I think this might be better than Mesa of Lost Women, but I don't know if it's better than Eintotter Hing im Netz, which is the
Spider Island.
Spider people? Island, yeah. Because like that had more menace and tension in it.
And more ladies.
Sure. There are a lot of gratuitous ladies in this movie.
There's two.
That's fair.
I guess three.
I mean, that depends on if you consider Coleman Francis's wife gratuitous. This might have been a problem leading to the divorce. I wasn't sure if it was better than Spider Island. So I was like, okay, well, I think it's better than Mesa of Lost Women. And I started looking down from there to find like, okay, what is it definitely better than? Mm-hmm. And I decided it was definitely better than The Snow Creature, which is the second from the bottom movie at $2.95, because The Snow Creature is really incompetent and it's really difficult to watch. And Condemned to Live, which is above it, is just boring.
True.
So my range ended up being $2.78 to $2.95. But I think I'm basically in agreement with you that this is better than Mesa of Lost Women. So like if, putting it at the new $2.79, because that's my ceiling and your floor.
Yeah.
Like I think that just slots it in, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So entering the list at the new number 279, The Beast of Yucca Flats from 1961, directed by Coleman Francis.
If you would like to see this list, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.com, and there you can find links to all of the other episodes that we have mentioned today, as well as our appeals box if you would like to contest this or any other ranking. Feel free to drop us a line through our Ask box on Tumblr or email us directly at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com if you want to submit that appeal.
Scream Scene updates every other Wednesday on SoundCloud, Spotify, and a whole variety of other podcatchers. If you want to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to our RSS feed. If you'd like to support the show, share us with your friends. Share us on whatever corners of the internet you feel safest on. And also just like over the water cooler or
in museums to workers who can't leave.
Right, exactly. And if you really want to help support the show, consider heading over to our Patreon at patreon.com/screamscenepodcast. You can become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. Patrons at the $5 and $10 levels get access to a whole wealth of bonus content, bonus audio at $5, bonus writing at $10. There's all kinds of cool stuff on there. I was recently re-listening to Sarah's audiobook of Carmilla, which she did a few years ago and is really cool.
And you can also find me talking more about Chicago and the Field Museum and that particular bloodsucker exhibit up on Patreon.
That's right. So if you want to check out all that cool bonus content, we really appreciate all of our patrons and the support that you've given us over the years. So that's patreon.com/screamscenepodcast.
So Ben, this wasn't a good movie. Mm-hmm. What are we watching next week?
Next week, Sarah, we are back with Hammer Horror for a Jimmy Sangster written script. It is kind of, at least the critics at the time considered it kind of a riff on Psycho or Les Diaboliques. So it's kind of Hammer exploring kind of more of that ground than the gothic horror. It's called A Taste of Fear.
That does sound like a pretty good title.
Christopher Lee's in it.
Oh, well, then it's going to be at least a baseline of good.
Right.
Well, we will see you then, creatures of the night.
Bye.
Bye.